Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Zegaldo from previously Lewis University PD in Illinois, but he is now currently serving as a director of the Suburban Law Enforcement Academy, which trains hundreds of police officers each year. He spent 10 years before law enforcement as a college administrator and then spent a total of 21 years in law enforcement. And wellness is something that is a huge topic and priority for him. So I'm really looking forward to having him on the show. Welcome, Chief Zagaldo. Zagadlo.
Thanks.
I said it
Zegadlo.
5 times. Zagadlo. Oh,
That was it. You got
man.
it.
Zagadlo. So anyone who's listening, I asked 5 times how to do this right so that I wouldn't butcher it, and I still did it wrong. So I
Yeah.
apologize for that, but Zagadlo.
Perfect.
Got it. Welcome. Thank you so much
Thanks.
for being here. I've actually been looking forward to this conversation. You had a really interesting path into law enforcement, and I was hoping that you could maybe give us a little bit of background because it's really unconventional to have someone who, had a whole nother career, 10 years as a college administrator, to then choose the career path of law enforcement. So give us a little bit of background on how that happened.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. Yeah, it's been a kind of a circuitous pathway to where I'm at now, but I originally said I'm not one of these guys who grew up as a kid wanting to be a police officer. I grew up on the south side of Chicago and I knew a lot of cops growing up. They were my friends' dads, my scoutmasters. They were in my church and had great admiration and respect and deference for them, but I never saw myself as one of them. Just didn't think I was tough enough or strong enough to be in that career. So it never dawned on me growing up to work in law enforcement. So I went to college, got a degree in history. My plan was to be a high school history teacher. Got my teaching certificate. I was teaching part time and waiting tables part time, and got an before I got a full time teaching gig in high school. I got an opportunity to work in student affairs at a university and really enjoyed that. And I did that for 10 years. And my last position was as an assistant dean at a college in Naperville, Illinois. And one of the departments I supervised was their public safety department. And I had no operational knowledge of law enforcement or public safety. So I started to study it and went to the director of the department. I said, "Hey, can you put me through the new officer training that you do for your new safety officers?" And he thought I was nuts because he's like, you're going to get pepper sprayed and you're going to have to learn to handcuff people. I said, okay, that sounds fun. So after a few months of kind of studying it, I really got intrigued by it and then had to have a very difficult conversation with my wife, whose father was a 35-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department. And she thought she was marrying an educator. And now suddenly I wanted to be a police officer. I took a part-time job as a park district police officer in a big municipality just to kind of test the water and see if I really wanted to make the leap. So by day, I was assistant dean of students, and by night, I was a park officer for about a year. And the more exposure I got and the more I learned about the career field, the more intrigued I got. So I finally made the leap and got on with a big municipal department in Illinois. Worked there for a number of years and was having a great time as a midnight shift patrol officer, use of force trainer. Got into their training unit early because I kind of had the background in education, which kind of got my foot in the door. And then in 2011, my alma mater, Lewis University, was starting a police department, and they were looking for someone who kind of had a combined skill set of higher education and law enforcement. That's a pretty short list of people. So I got tapped to come back to my alma mater and help them build a police department, where I ultimately served as chief for 6 years. And then just a couple of weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, I retired my badge and have taken over as the director of the Suburban Law Enforcement Academy, where we're training up the next generation of cops.
I love it. I don't think I've ever had anyone on this podcast that's like, yeah, like I thought that being pepper sprayed sounded fun. So was like, let's
It's
go.
not. I was wrong about that, but the
Um,
training is cool.
I do want to pick your brain because I can tell that you are someone who dives deep into the research. Everything that you're saying, you're like, yeah, I wanted to learn more. And so, I wanted to immerse myself. I wanted to understand how things worked and why and what we can do to be better. One of the things that you told me when we initially talked was that when you did enter into this profession, you started to notice the behaviors of certain people and people who were your age, and you were kind of shocked by this because you were obviously entering in maybe a little bit later than some other people. So give us a little bit of background on what you noticed. And I have some follow up questions for you, but I'm really interested to kind of pick your brain. But what did you notice initially when you entered in?
Yeah, so the obviously the culture in higher education and the culture in law enforcement could not be any further apart. Law enforcement is or higher education is kind of it's warm and fuzzy and it's very nurturing and it's very welcoming and it's very diverse. Uh, and law enforcement is military command and control, very highly structured, very black and white. So, I kind of grew up in that higher education environment, and I came into law enforcement late. I was in my early 30s. Most people come in their early 20s. So when I made that transition and got into the law enforcement organization, I was really surprised to see that the guys who were my age but who had been doing it for 10 years were some of them were still kind of acting like frat boys. They were reckless and they were drinking a lot and they were partying and they were going to strip clubs and marriages were breaking up and getting back together. And it just seemed really chaotic for people of that age. And that kind of piqued my interest about why I was witnessing that, why coming from one organizational culture into a completely different organizational culture, this kind of like arrested development scenario was going on. And I haven't written the doctoral thesis on this yet, but I think it's good fodder for one. I think there's an impact of that exposure to trauma, that exposure to hypervigilance, that and in an incompletely developed brain. So a 22-year-old, 23-year-old kid right out of the academy isn't there yet in terms of their emotional intelligence, their maturity, their resilience, coping mechanisms. And so they're thrown into this meat grinder and pummeled with this negativity. And you're taught to always be looking over your shoulder and never trust anybody, and everyone's lying to you, and everyone you interact with on the street is going to whip out a gun and blow you away. And if you put that into a brain that's not fully developed, it's going to have a negative impact on the emotional development of the people that are subjected to it. So I think my theoretical framework there is that these guys coming into the profession too early, with insufficient support mechanisms and insufficient coping mechanisms, have their development disrupted in a way that leads to all these negative behaviors.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm so excited to talk to you because I want to talk about the support systems and the coping mechanisms and kind of what you think is the solve. And, obviously I know, and I asked you the question, I was like, wait, okay, so you retired as chief to enter into this new role where now you're working with young recruits. And I asked you, I'm like, is that why, you want to start as early as possible? And you were like, yes. So I'm excited to dive into this. But I do remember when we talked offline, you made me reflect on my personal experiences with things. And I don't think I shared this with you offline, but anyone who's listened to the podcast knows a little bit about my background. But my dad was a forever drug addict, gang affiliated. And I remember growing up because he started young when he was in high school. That's when he started running around doing drugs, hanging with the gangs, and so a life of that kind of lifestyle and rough and tumble, running the streets and dealing with people that, aren't maybe the best influences. But I remember really struggling as I started to mature and really wanting him to show up as this like mature adult, father figure, and always being really disappointed and feeling as if he didn't have the capability of doing that. And I remember being like really confused when I was younger, but I think now I've come to realize kind of the same thing that you just said, is understanding that at a really young age, he wasn't developed. And not only was there substance abuse, but he was also involved in crime and seeing things that a young person doesn't typically see and doing things that a young person shouldn't do. And I think that there is a lot of arrested development in his case too. And I've almost had to come to terms with the fact that he will never maybe be as evolved as I would maybe like him to be. And I've had to come to terms with the fact that maybe in a lot of different ways I have a higher maturity level because of that. And so I think that us having this conversation gave me a lot of self-reflection of like, yeah, I do think that exposure to those things early on does impact your development long term. And so my question for you, when you were talking and you said it, and the support and the coping mechanisms, is how do we, like, what is the solve, what is the solution based conversation that we can start having? Because a lot of the things that you said with stressors on the job, the things that you're going to see out on the streets, you can't control the calls for service and the certain things that you see, but you can control the culture and you can control the coping mechanisms that are available. So can you talk a little bit about what you think is maybe the resolution for this?
Yeah, I think radiation is a good analogy. When we talk about the impact of radiation, you look at shielding and time and distance. And so exposure to a career in law enforcement is radioactive, and your DNA is going to be impacted more dramatically if it's underdeveloped. So to the extent that we can begin early on to develop shielding, distance, and honestly, minimizing the time of exposure. So
Mm.
one I don't have this all solved, but one consideration is, do we start people in their law enforcement career at a later point? And that has big implications in terms of legislative infrastructure and everything else, because you got pension plans and all kinds of stuff that would be impacted by that. But a person in there who's 30 or 35 has a different, their DNA is a little bit more developed than someone who's in their early 20s. And then we minimize, the typical law enforcement career is 25 or 30 years. I got out at 21, and my career path allowed me to really not be overly exposed to significant trauma. I worked the street and patrol in a big city for 5 years, and that was sufficient. And then I went into more administrative roles after that. So how do we chart a path for these younger recruits that minimize the exposure to trauma and allow them to diversify their public safety experience so that it's not trauma for 30 years? And then helping them to understand right out of the gate how you manage your stress, your anxiety, your health, your physical fitness, your diet. Going out, most of our young people are going to go out on midnight shift. There's nothing to eat but fast food. You're eating in your squad car, so you want to get something your burger you can shove in your mouth at 3 o'clock in the morning. So the whole package is constructed in a way that's unhealthy, and we really need to impress upon them early on in their developmental arc that they have to be prepared that the experience is going to impact them. I was diagnosed with anxiety before I went into law enforcement. So I had to learn, before I got into that high trauma environment, I had to learn mechanisms to manage anxiety. And that was everything from meditation to exercise to, engaging in my hobbies, yoga, physical fitness, diet, all of that stuff helps me navigate my anxiety journey and kind of manage that. And I had that skill set going into law enforcement. So not having the proper preparation or awareness, sets them off on a disadvantage right from the beginning of their career. So we've really got to get in early and help them understand, the other thing we're seeing is kind of this generational shift. So as I've had the opportunity to work with college students now most of my career, and in the 30 years that I've been working with college students, I've seen a significant change in their resilience, in their competencies related to interpersonal communication. Those are degrading. I learned to manage conflict out in a pickup football game in the park with my buddies, and we'd yell at each other and argue, and that's how I learned to manage conflict. This generation has learned to manage conflict, from behind a headset, playing Call of Duty, cussing at someone, on the other side of the globe. So they're not prepared for, they're not equipped with the same level of skills. So we've got to help them understand those deficiencies, and we've got to help toughen them up without breaking them. That's the other challenge, because they're more fragile than they were a couple of decades ago. And we can't send them out on the street fragile. They won't be successful. So we've got to, in their initial contact and training, we've got to toughen them up, which means subjecting them to some stress inoculation and some realistic scenario training, some physical fitness training that's going to push their limits without breaking them. So finding that balancing point of pushing them to build the muscles up without tearing the muscle off is a challenge.
I think there's two like kind of segments that I want to kind of break down. So the first one being, of course, best case scenario is to introduce these things as early as possible to set them up for success. And so I know that, that's exactly why you're doing what you do today and why you chose to transition into this position. But what are some maybe like tactical things? Because I have conversations with academies all across the country, and I think that, from an outside perspective, obviously, I don't know all of the intricacies of scheduling and the things that are required that have to happen. But the conversations I'm having is that a lot of these agencies, or excuse me, academies, they want to have more wellness training. They want to introduce more of these things, but their schedule is so packed full with what they have to do already that they're struggling to find the time to adequately train, in the way that is going to be effective. And so, what are some of the things that you think can realistically be done to be able to implement some of these healthier coping mechanisms and resources at an academy level?
Yeah, that's a really important point. So, like the state of Illinois says, this is it. This is the curriculum. These are the hours. These are the topics. So we don't get any control over content, but we do have control over pedagogy and instructional approach and modality and quality of instructors and competency of instructors. So being able to control those variables helps. The length of the academy, when I went to the police academy, it was 11 weeks. It's now up to 16 weeks. So we're getting more contact time with the recruits, and the state is mandating things like officer wellness, which didn't used to be part of the program. So we're moving in the right direction, and I think being able to to do a module on officer wellness when we're talking about both their mental and their physical fitness as being really crucially important to their survival, and we're talking about we're kind of demystifying mental illness and seeking help for mental illness and engaging peer support mechanisms, and having those concepts fresh in their mind as they're coming out of the academy, I think gives us a head start. We got a ways to go, but we're making good progress in that direction. And I think as we move forward, we're going to improve our methodologies and our pedagogy and our approach to instruction in a way that makes those precious few moments more impactful.
Yeah, and I agree. I've seen, the move in a positive direction. I actually started at the academy level. So that was where like I got my introduction. And I remember it was so funny. This was almost 9 years ago. So imagine like what the mindset was 8, 9 years ago, different than it is today, right? I think everyone can agree with that. But there was this guy, I was teaching a free city event, and he was doing like a circuit training, and I was doing like a mobility kind of like rest and recovery after. And he was a sergeant at one of our police academies, and he was so like excited. Like he was like, yes, like I want you to come and I want you to teach my recruit class some injury prevention and some stress management stuff. Like, will you do it? And I had never, like, I had worked in the public space, and I, had experience in, working with people, but I didn't know anything about working with recruits or the law enforcement world at all. And I was like, sure. And so I walked in, and he was so excited, so ahead of his time. And he was like, I'm going to get you introduced to everybody, and then I'm going to leave. I'm actually leaving. And I was like, where are you going? And he's like, I'm going to become a firefighter. Like I'm out of here. And so he left to become a firefighter. But the point is that when I started, I had some people who really championed what we were trying to do and believed in the vision of helping early in the career at an academy level to set everyone up for success. And I had other people who were skeptics of this. And I had people come up to me that would say, and I always preface this, that it was kind hearted. I never felt like they were saying this to be mean or, but they were just like, hey, like, this is not a part of our culture. It never will be. Cops don't do this, just so you know, so we can set realistic expectations for this, and now having this conversation with you where you guys are like, no, like we are recognizing, and you said that these resources are crucial to survival. Like I wrote that down. I'm like,
Literally. Yeah.
wow, like to have that be a part of the conversation now is a testament to how far we've come, even in that short 8 years since I've been in this space. But I agree with you. I think that wellness is safety training. It's how can we keep everybody as safe as possible? And I think that there are a lot of different ways we can look at it, keeping them physically safe, keeping them mentally safe. How can we make sure that we create longevity and quality of life? How can we promote effective decision making? And so I I'm excited by this conversation because I think that knowing that there are people like you who are like, hey, like we might not have control over these things, but it is possible for us to be more effective with the time that we do have in incorporating some of these resources to set people up long term.
Yeah, and you mentioned quality of life. So there's a spectrum. There's survival. I can get through it and collect my pension, but I'm on my third marriage. I'm an alcoholic, and 2/3 of my pension is going to pay alimony or whatever. And I have a gambling addiction. That's survival. You made it, but that's not good quality of life. So we want to get them to that farther along that spectrum towards good quality of life where they make it to retirement and they get a different job like I did, and they have a happy family and a happy home life, and they're self-actualized.
Yeah. And I don't think that there's anyone, I have yet to meet someone where you give scenario A and you say, how many of you guys want this? How many of you want to have 3 divorces and an alcohol problem and, live beyond your means and be living paycheck to paycheck? No one's going to raise their hand for that. No one wants that. But yet we still see the statistics and a lot of people falling into that category. And so I think the more we can bring awareness to, hey, these are things that could potentially happen, but here are the things that we can do to be proactive and preventative so that you do get to the end. And I agree with you. It's so sad for me when people are like, yeah, we just want everyone to survive this career. And it's like, of course, we want people to get to the end and, be alive, but like we also need to raise the bar of our thinking. Like we want people to be intact. We want people to have quality of life and, be happier and healthier and, be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Like that's the goal. It's not like crawl into the finish line. We want people to be sprinting to the finish line. So how do we get there? And so I think my second question for you, and these are kind of the two buckets. So we have the first one is like, okay, best case scenario, being really strategic and intentional with the training and the resources that are offered at an academy level. What I see, because I still work in the academy level. So, right, I work in both. And so I see this disconnect between academy and graduating and going into agency. And what I'm seeing, and I don't know if you can relate to this or not, because we're in different states, but what I'm seeing is at an academy level, the receptiveness is there. Everyone is bright eyed, bushy tailed. They will absorb everything that you say. If you're like, do this breathing technique, they're like, cool, or like, do this mobility class. Yes, yes, ma'am. Anything for you, ma'am. And then there's something that happens. They graduate, they go into their agency, and now there is no longer any required training, right? So at academy level, it's all required, and then it's up to them to stick to it and to continue that. But then I also think that maybe there's a little bit more of that culture and peer pressure that starts to come in of like, toughen up, kid, and like this tough man mentality. Can you talk a little bit? You said two things: coping mechanisms, but also culture and support systems within the organization. So, are you seeing the same things that I'm seeing where, something kind of changes, where now the culture is different? And how can agencies maybe support a better, more supportive environment that can help these young people to feel comfortable taking advantage of these things and not like throwing them out the window as soon as they get to their agencies?
Yeah, we're in the midst of a cultural shift, and cultural shifts take generations to complete. So, I got 70 recruits in this current academy class. 50 of them, when they hit field training in their first week, are going to hear a quote that goes something like, "Forget everything you heard in the academy," and then dot dot dot, and then the FTO will train them on the way we really do things. But it used to be that 69 out of that 70 would get that quote. So we're gradually moving, and I I stay in touch with some of the police leaders that I went to staff and command with, and who run local agencies. There is undoubtedly a cultural change afoot, and as the next generation of police leaders replaces the last, they're more attentive to these topics than ever before.
Yeah.
So I think I'd love for it to be done tomorrow, but I think the progress is good, and I think police chiefs in the area that I know, most of them are attentive to officer wellness, and are fostering a culture in their organization that promotes it, and are less tolerant of the old crusty veteran who says, "Have a beer and toughen up," or go to the bar after work and you'll feel better. That's really becoming less common, and I think in a decade, it's going to be really a much more nurturing environment as it relates to officer wellness.
Yeah. I agree with you. I've talked to a lot of leaders in your state and all across the country, and I think that the focus on wellness and how you can create a healthy culture and a foundation of wellness within the organization is super apparent and at the forefront. And so I'm excited to see what the future looks like. And I've said this for years that there's this, shift happening. And I don't think it's to anyone's fault. I think that it's easy to kind of point fingers at everybody, but I think you don't know what you don't know, and the older generation, like that's how they were taught, that like this was not a conversation, this is how they grew up. And now having more awareness and education about these things has allowed, the levels of understanding to grow, and now there's more implementation because of that. And so I'm excited to see what the next generation looks like. And my question for you, and it was kind of going back to the FTO topic. How important do you think is FTO selection when it comes to culture?
It's absolutely critical, because they a young recruit officer, it is the learning that occurs in that field training program is is as impactful as what they get in the academy, if not more, because it's the behavior that's being modeled, it's the culture that's being modeled, and it's occurring in real time in real life situations. So it's a completely different thing to do a scenario in the academy than it is to be out literally out on the street at a call for service, learning how to do that call for service.
Yeah.
So selecting those FTOs becomes crucial in this overall model of promoting officer success and officer wellness. And again, I'm seeing that cultural change. I'm seeing the next generation come in. There are FTOs working now who came through the academy when wellness with this kind of wellness approach and wellness model. So again, we're not all the way there, and it's a cultural shift, and it's going to take some time, and there's still some cranky, crusty ones out there, but we're moving in the right direction, and those FTOs really should have a great reverence for the significance of their impact on the development of the next generation of police officers.
Yeah, and there's a couple things I wanted to kind of touch on, and I think it's a partnership, right? I think that it's important, the message and the culture, of course, but then I think also, and maybe if there's anyone who is younger and earlier in their career who is listening, it's, how can you stay true to your values and who you are and what your goals are long term? And I think we can all ask ourselves too, the question of, are we hurting or helping? And we have to apply that to ourselves first. Are the things that we're doing helpful, or are they hurtful? And if you are out and you are choosing unhealthy coping mechanisms and not dealing with the things, and now we'll just use the examples that I used before, you're gambling all your money away, or you're neglecting your family, or you have an alcohol problem, is that helpful or hurtful? Most people, I'm hoping everyone, says that that's hurtful, right? And so I think that we have to ask ourselves, are our behaviors helpful or hurtful? Are the mechanisms healthy or unhealthy, the coping mechanisms that we're using? And I've done this so many times in my life where I've allowed myself to be influenced by the negativity. And that is my fault. It's easier said than done. I understand, like it, and I think that negativity is a poison that can seep into everything. And if you're not careful, you become that negative person, right? And so I think as a young person who has like such a fresh opportunity to decide their trajectory, you haven't been exposed to 25 years of trauma yet. You will be, but you haven't yet. And so you have this amazing opportunity to set yourself up for success now. And so I think that would be my message, and something that I didn't do well when I was younger. I allowed outside influences to impact me negatively. And ultimately, it was my decision and my choice, and I have to take responsibility for that. But if there is someone who is, a poison or a negativity, or negative within the organization, not allowing that to affect you, but then also understanding, are you that person who is positively impacting others, or are you negatively impacting others? And I think that it takes a lot of self-assessment to understand that. Are you someone who is a mentor or an FTO? And, are you saying, don't listen to what you just heard in the academy, and are you helping people or hurting people? So that was kind of I'll digress now, but that was kind of my thought process is, how can we ask ourselves those questions? Are we helping or hurting ourselves, and are we helping or hurting other people?
Yeah, I think of two things when you make that point. One is morale. So you'll frequently hear from a grumpy officer, the morale in this department sucks. And my question to that grumpy officer is always, what have you done to improve it? What have you done to improve morale? And generally we come to the agreement that you control your own morale. So if you're a miserable, crusty person, you're making a choice to be a miserable, crusty person. And the other piece of that is how we view our locus of control. So do I have an external locus of control where I'm consistently the victim of the department politics and the crummy leadership and the community that doesn't like me and the political thing, and it's all causing me to be a failure? Or do I have an internal locus of control where I can manage this outcome based on my behavior, based on the choices I make, based on how I conduct myself. I can steer myself into a positive experience. And I think that's a really important concept for our young people to grasp. Is we want to drive them into that internal locus of control mindset where I'm driving my own ship, and I'm mixing metaphors now, I think, but I can steer my own boat, steer my own car
Yeah.
in the direction I want it to go.
Well, and as a young person, like you have neuroplasticity on your side, you get to like create that mindset when you're younger. And so like taking advantage of the opportunity to train your brain to think about those things. It's obviously harder when we're older. It's like you can't it's the I'm going to use a couple old adages, right? So it's like you can't, teach an old dog new tricks or whatever, but you can,
You
I
can.
think you can, maybe it takes a little bit longer, but you can,
Yeah.
and so um I really, and I know it's so cheesy, but I really like the, if you're pointing your finger at someone else, you got three fingers that are pointing back at you, and so like how can you take control and control the controllable, right? Like it's so funny you said this, and I won't get into detail about it, but I just had a conversation with someone, and it was like you and this person and that person and that, and it was all this like finger pointing. And at the end of the day, there are so many things that we cannot control. I can't control, you know, let's just use this as an example. You can't control leadership. You can't control the types of calls you get. You can't control, the next person next to you and what they say or what they do, but you do have control over your own actions and reactions to things, period. And so we have to take accountability and responsibility for ourselves. We have to. And yeah, does it make it any easier? No. Like, does that suck? Like if you are surrounded by people who are all really negative, yeah, like not fun. But like, do you still have the choice to find positivity and to be that light? Yes, 100% you do. And I think that the more we can train ourselves and understand that we have more control than we think we do, but we just have to bring that awareness internally and then choose a different path, if everyone else is negative. And then also having self-assessment to understand, am I the problem?
Yeah.
And there might be some people that like look around and they're like, dang it, I'm the problem. And then
Yeah.
how do we change that? So yeah, I'm a big fan of control the controllable. You you can choose how you respond to things, and no one else can make you happy or healthy. You have to make yourself happy and healthy. And the ideal situation is that you also work within an organization that cares about your health and your happiness and is able to provide resources that can help you get there. But at the end of the day, you have to be the one to take action.
Yeah.
What do you think I know we said it's a generational shift, and I always relate it to the Titanic. I'm like, it's slow to turn, it's not a jet ski that we can whip around, it's going to take some time. But what do you think, and maybe like tactically, if you were to kind of wave a magic wand, like what do you think maybe the next decade looks like, or you would hope for it to look like?
Well, I think we've seen implementation of things like routine officer wellness checks. I think those are going to become more of an industry standard across the country. Integration of wellness curriculum in our academy, and then as part of in-service work. So like I went to when I was still the chief, I thought I was going to set an example. I went to a yoga for our first responders day-long class, and it was great. But I was already a yoga person before, and I came back to my department and I was like, all right, I will pay for anybody who wants to go to this, and like no one was interested in it. So I mean, but I think so. I think we got to kind of demystify some of that and get people a little more comfortable with things that might be perceived by the law enforcement world as touchy feely or warm and fuzzy or whatever. And I think as we progress, we're going to see more of that. More of those barriers come down, and people getting a little bit more comfortable recognizing that as human beings who are subject to human frailties that we as cops have to embrace some of this stuff. And it's okay. And I think that that's what the next few years is going to bring for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I think you're exactly right. I think we're going to start to see stigma breaking down, receptiveness opening up. And then once that happens, I think that we're going to see a far faster ROI because we're going to have people actually participating in these things, right? And so I've talked about this many times, but I think that there's three steps. There's awareness is the first step. So awareness that there are things that could be improved or there are challenges. And then the second one is education. What are those things that can help? We talked about some of those things today, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, whatever it is that, works for you. And then the third one and most important one is action or implementation. And so I think we're seeing a lot of action and implementation now from an organizational level, but how can we break the stigma, bring the walls down so we see action and implementation from everyone else within the organization to take advantage of those things. So to your point of what you said, you as the chief were like, hey, I'm going to do this and this is great and I'm supportive. And then everyone else is like, no. So how can we bridge that gap so that when you come back and say, try this, everyone's like, yeah. And then I think we're going to see faster progress from there.
Yeah, honestly, like in the greater kind of spectrum of law enforcement culture, I'm kind of in the like there's the law enforcement culture is a lot like high school. You got the cool guys like the SWAT operators, that's like the football team. Those are like the popular cool guys. And then you've got guys like me who do PowerPoint presentations and like computers and stuff. And so we're the nerds. And so honestly, that the football team guys are what are aspirational for many of our young officers. So if we can get the SWAT operators with all their, muscles and tattoos and BDUs to like embrace this mindset, and that's going to be a challenge. That's what's going to attract because that's what these recruits are. A lot of them are aspiring to be. They want to be the captain of the football team. So if the nerd who sits in the office is doing it, it's not as cool as as the captain of the football team. So bringing that mindset into that part of law enforcement culture, I think, could be really impactful.
Yeah. Do you know what's interesting is I've actually had quite a few local agencies as a strategy had me work with SWAT first because they, to your point, they're people are looking up to them. And if we're looking at wellness and people are like, oh, wellness is weak or it's woo woo or it's, whatever, but then they see the SWAT guys doing it. Now it no longer is viewed as weak or woo or whatever. It's like, oh, SWAT guys are doing it. I'm going to do it too.
When
Right.
I do a training I'll do a de-escalation training, and part of de-escalation training I'll talk about breathing and box breathing and yoga breathing, but I refer to it as combat breathing. And then I put on my PowerPoint slide, I put a picture of like a SWAT dude with a helmet on. And if I call it combat breathing, they're totally into it. If I take that same slide and it says yoga breathing or box breathing, then it's like, it's not cool. So, I mean, finding the ways to like market this to make it cool, I think is going to help.
Yeah, I've had my own personal experience with that. And someone told me just put tactical in front of anything and it's cool.
Anything.
And
Yep.
I used to resist against this. So I was like, we are adults. We can call it what it is. Like if it's yoga, it's yoga. If it's breathing, it's breathing. If it's meditation, and like I realized really quickly that I had to get out of my own way and understand the importance of presenting something in a way that people respond. And if the goal is to get people to use these things, then we have to present it in a way that is, I don't want to say exciting for them, but something that they're going to be receptive to, because if we don't, then no one wins, it's a lose lose. And so I had to learn that really early on. And one of the things that's been really successful for me too is focusing on outcome driven conversations rather than method driven conversations. And so, rather than saying, hey, do you guys want to do a breathing technique or a tactical breathing technique? I'll say, hey, how many of you guys want to sleep better? And they're like, me. I'm like, cool. we're going to do this breathing technique and it's going to help you to sleep better. And they're like, okay, sign me up, And so I think that, again, it's strategic, how can we present this in a way that people respond? But I found a lot of success in that too. It's like, yes, put tactical in front of anything, make everything like, just like wear all black,
Paint
say
it black and call it tactical.
tactical.
Yep.
Exactly. And then try to, present it in a way that is going to be more widely received. I don't think that we're ever going to get 100% all the time. But if we can get the majority, then that spreads.
It's
My
true.
my final question is for that younger generation. I know that that's, what you're doing today. You're trying to set everyone up for success as early in their career as possible. And so for the new generation, the young men and women who are entering into the career today, what words of wisdom would you share with them?
My one word of wisdom is listen. Listen more, listen intently. When you have time, when you have the time to listen, listen. Listen to your victims. They need your support. Listen to your suspects. They're going to say stuff that'll incriminate them. Listen to your witnesses. They're going to provide good information. Listen to your family. They know you better than you think. Listen to your body. Listen to yourself. It's going to alert you when you're out of balance. So sometimes we don't have time to listen. We have to make an immediate response or immediate decision. But when officer safety permits, listen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on here today. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was really interesting, and I love your perspective and the things that you're doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Paige.
Of course.